This podcast is a member of the Place to Be Nation family. Visit us at placetobenation.com, the only place to be in your pop culture world.
Hello and welcome back to Movie Review of the Day on Place to Be Nation Pop Experience. I'm Miranda and I'm going to be your host for today. This week, as I'm sure you can tell, we've been diving into biopics. Biopics are stories based on real people, real events, and moments in history that don't always get the spotlight they deserve. So that made it easy for me to choose today's movie, which is The Siege of Jadotville. This was released in 2016 on Netflix. And it's a film that tells the story of an Irish UN peacekeeping unit stationed in the Congo in 1961, led by Commandant Pat Quinlan. And I'm just going to say this up front. This is one of those stories that a lot of people probably had not ever heard of prior to this movie. And I think that's what part of it makes it so compelling. The film stars Jamie Dornan as Quinlan. And what I really appreciate about his performance is how grounded it really feels. He isn't playing this over-the-top dramatic war hero. He's playing a leader, someone who has to make decisions under pressure, who has to think strategically, and who is very aware of the responsibility he has for the people under his command. And that kind of quiet authority works really well in this story. The basic premise is that this group of around 150 Irish soldiers is sent to a politically unstable region, and tensions are already high. They're told, hey, you're there for peacekeeping. Things are under total control. You're just there, again, keeping the peace. Very quickly, though, that turns out not to be the case. And what follows is essentially, well, a siege. They're surrounded, outnumbered, and dealing with a situation that escalates far beyond what they were prepared for. And this is where the movie really shifts. It's not just because of the action. It's about strategy, survival, and leadership. One of the things I really like about this film is that it doesn't rush into the chaos. It takes its time setting up the situation so that you understand where they are, why they're there, and how quickly things kind of start to fall apart. And then when the action does hit, it feels earned. The combat scenes themselves are intense, but they're also controlled. This isn't a movie that's trying to overwhelm you with constant noise and movement. It focuses on positioning, tactics, and the reality of what it meant to be in that kind of situation. Something else that stands out is the sense of isolation. These soldiers essentially are on their own. Support beyond limited, communication extremely unreliable, and decisions being made above them, well, they're not helping. And this just adds another layer of tension. It's not just because the enemy, or about the enemy rather, it's about being stuck in a system that isn't working the way it should. And this is where the biopic element really comes in, because this isn't just a war story. It's about recognition. It's about a group of soldiers who did something extraordinary and didn't immediately get the acknowledgement they deserve. And that's something that the film even leans into, specifically towards the end. The idea that history doesn't always get told the right way the first time. Sometimes it takes years, even decades, for those stories to be properly recognized. In this case, that delay wasn't an accident. When these soldiers returned home, the narrative around what happened was complicated, to say the least. They had been forced to surrender after holding out days against overwhelming odds. And instead of being recognized for their strategy, their resilience, their surrender was viewed as failure. There was a stigma attached to it. And because of that, the full story of what they actually accomplished, how outnumbered they were, how effectively they held their position, it wasn't acknowledged for decades. It wasn't until much, much later that their actions were reevaluated and recognized for what they were, heroes. And in reality, they had held off much larger force, protected each other, made the calls to surrender only when it was clear that continuing would cost lives. Most of the soldiers that survived were taken as prisoners of war and at one point eventually released. But that recognition for what they'd done didn't come until much later. many went home being seen as failures. And it was past many of them's death years later that they would be reevaluated and shown as the heroes that they actually were. This adds context and a lot of weight to this movie. You're not just watching a battle. You're watching a story that for a long time, as I mentioned, wasn't told the way it should have been. Now, I will say this. It is not a flashy movie. It's not trying to be overly dramatic or emotionally manipulative. It's very straightforward in how it tells the story. And for me, that worked. And in its favor as well. It lets the events speak for themselves. It lets the performances carry the weight. And it keeps the focus on the people involved rather than trying to turn it into something bigger than it needed to be. Overall, this movie is a strong entry for the week because to me, it tells an important story. It's well acted and it brings attention to a moment in history that deserves to be remembered. Sometimes that's exactly what a movie like this needs to do. So, that's today's movie review of the day on Place to Be Nation Pop Experience. I'm Miranda, and until next time, remember, some stories just take a little longer to be heard.